The air tasted like regret and recycled piss. Typical day under Mars' rusty surface, where the humans had been neatly stuffed away like unwanted holiday decorations. The Xylox took over, about 2 decades ago, and humans were now a delightful mix of oppressed and expendable. Just another Tuesday. In one of the dimly lit caverns, Talon was busy trying to remember what freedom felt like. Maybe it was like that first sip of coffee on a cold morning, or maybe it was just the absence of Xylox stink everywhere. Hard to recall when the only taste in your mouth is the metallic tang of Martian dust. "You know," Talon muttered, his voice echoing off the stone walls, "this place could really use a decorator. Maybe some cheerful death traps, or at least a splash of color that isn't murderous red." Lyra smirked as she stretched her legs, her dance an act of rebellion against the monotony of their existence. "Careful, Talon. One more sarcastic comment and you might get promoted to Chief Complaints Officer." "Oh, the dreams I have," he shot back, leaning against the cold rock, his fingers trailing absent-mindedly over maps of long-forgotten Earth cities etched in his mind. "Did I ever tell you about Paris? That place with the tower and the snails?" she replied, rolling her eyes. "Yeah, Talon, it's on my bucket list." "Right under never-ending servitude," Talon chuckled. It was a sound that echoed oddly around the cavern, too light for the heavy air. At least someone appreciated his attempts at humor. As a former historian, Talon had the dubious honor of knowing exactly how far humanity had fallen. It was a talent that earned him little more than scorn from his fellow captives, who preferred to forget the past and focus on the next meal, or the next Xylox patrol that wouldn't whip them for breathing too loud. Not Lyra, though. Lyra, who twisted in the air like gravity was just another suggestion, had this annoying habit of listening. Not that it got her any special treatment. Rebellion was a dance in her veins, each pirouette a big middle finger to the Xylox, who probably didn't have middle fingers but surely got the message. "You know," Lyra mused, watching Talon as if he were some particularly amusing insect, "for a guy who knows so much, you sure are stuck with me in this hellhole." "Ah, but you see, I choose this hellhole," Talon replied with a grin, "because where else would I find such delightful company?" Her laugh was a soft burst of sound, quickly swallowed by the cavern. "You sure you didn't mistake delightful for delusional?" Talon opened his mouth to retort, but the familiar shuffle of alien feet cut him off. The Xylox were making their rounds, their long, angular limbs swaying with a grace that made human movements look clumsy and quaint. Their skin was a sickly, mottled green, like a rotting avocado but less appetizing. "Showtime," Lyra whispered, her eyes narrowing. The Xylox patrol was here to remind everyone of their place. Not that anyone was about to forget. The scars on their backs were testimony enough. The aliens stopped, surveying the humans with their beady eyes that somehow managed to look both bored and disdainful. One of the Xylox, the leader judging by the extra frills on its neck, hissed something that sounded like a threat wrapped in a riddle. Talon didn't speak Xylox, but he had a pretty good idea of the translation. Work harder, die later. Lyra read it herself. She had a plan, a mad, desperate plan, one she'd shared with Talon in whispers and code. Unwilling to let humanity fade into the dull pages of a history book yet to be written, she was willing to risk it all. "Remember," she said softly, her eyes bright with a dangerous spark, "timing is everything." Talon nodded, feeling the weight of the moment press down on him. Timing. A concept humans had mastered poorly, but it was all they had. That, and a lot of blind hope. As the Xylox moved on, the cavern settled into its usual rhythm of resigned labor. But Talon and Lyra's hearts beat to a new tempo now, one that was fierce and defiant. "You sure this is gonna work?" Talon asked, a dubious eyebrow raised. "Sure as hell not," Lyra answered, flashing a grin over her shoulder. "But wouldn't it be boring if it did?" Boring wasn't the word he'd choose, but he nodded anyway. Predictable, safe. Two things they hadn't been afforded in a long time. Lyra's dance had always been more than just movement. It was a distraction, a message, And today, it was the starter pistol for their reckless rebellion. She moved with a grace that belied the hardness of her life, her feet barely touching the ground, her eyes fixed on something far beyond the cavern walls. The humans in the colony were used to Lyra's performances. They rarely stopped to watch, too beaten down to appreciate beauty. But today, a few heads turned, curiosity piqued by the urgency in her movements. Lyra's dance was a signal, one Talon was waiting for. A few more steps, a spin, and a leap all rehearsed to perfection. "Now," she whispered as she hit the ground, her voice swallowed by applause that didn't come. Talon moved, a shadow among shadows. His heart pounded like a war drum as he slipped through the crowd, his destination clear. The old control room, a relic from the early days before the Xylox stripped them of everything useful. "If this works," he muttered to himself, ducking past a group of humans too busy to notice, "I'm throwing myself a parade." The control room was dark, the smell of dust and disuse thick in the air. It was the kind of place you'd expect to find ghosts, not hope. Talon flipped switches, his fingers dancing over the controls with a precision that surprised him. Rerouting power, redirecting signals, it was a symphony of desperation. Back in the cavern, Lyra continued her dance, the rhythmic slap of her feet a soundtrack to Talon's work. She could see the Xylox watching her now, their interest piqued. Perfect. The Xylox leader, probably sensing something was amiss, barked an order to its comrades. The aliens started forward, but Lyra was ready. She spun, her movements a blur, her voice rising in a song that echoed off the walls. It was a distraction, pure and simple, but it bought Talon the time he needed. The lights flickered, a heartbeat in the darkness. Talon's fingers flew, his mind racing. If they were lucky, the Xylox would think it was just another power surge, a common occurrence in their crumbling world. If they weren't lucky, well, they'd be too dead to care. "Almost there," Talon whispered, more to himself than anyone else. The final sequence was tricky, a relic of outdated human technology that was as stubborn as it was unreliable. Lyra's song rose, her voice a rallying cry for the humans around her. They were watching now, really watching, and their eyes were bright with something dangerous. Hope. With a final, desperate push, Talon finished the sequence. The lights blazed to life, momentarily blinding the Xylox, whose alien eyes weren't designed for such brilliance. The humans cheered, a sound that echoed through the caverns, a sound that was defiance incarnate. The Xylox leader screeched, its voice a high-pitched wail of anger and fear. It rallied its troops, their alien limbs moving with urgency, but it was too late. Lyra's dance had become a symbol, a call to arms that spread through the colony like wildfire. She leaped, her movements a promise of freedom, her eyes locked on Talon's as if to say, "This is it." Talon nodded, a grim smile on his lips. "It's a start," he said softly, his voice lost in the chaos. The humans surged forward, their spirits lifted, their fear forgotten. They had nothing, and yet in this moment they had everything. The Xylox fought back, their weapons firing, their screams filling the air. But the humans were relentless, a tide that wouldn't be turned. They had been broken for so long, but now they were whole. Lyra and Talon moved through the chaos, their paths converging. They were just two people, two small cogs in a machine that had been too long in coming. "Think they'll remember us?" Talon asked, his voice a low rumble beneath the noise. "Does it matter?" Lyra replied, a smile playing on her lips despite the danger. "We're making history, not writing it." Talon laughed, a sound that was swallowed by the roar of battle. "Yeah, but you know me. I like to leave a good footnote." As they joined the fray, their movements keeping time with the heartbeats of the humans around them, it became clear that this was just the beginning. Mars had always been a harsh mistress, but today she was a stage for something extraordinary. The humans moved as one, a force that surprised even themselves. "To hell with footnotes," Lyra said, her eyes blazing as she faced the enemy. "Let's give them a damn good story." And so they did as the battle raged on, a symphony of chaos and courage, a dance of liberation. Talon always had a knack for making himself at home in places that were decidedly unhome-like. which was probably why he was rummaging through a dusty old archive room rather than sticking to his assigned productivity enhancement zone, a term the Xylocs fondly used for the miserable treadmills of their labor camps. The Xylocs had a real talent for euphemisms. The archive was a forgotten relic from humanity's first desperate years on Mars, back when people still believed the word colonization implied something other than a lifetime of being taxed for breathing by a bunch of aliens who looked like nature's bad joke. Ah, the good old days, Talon mused to himself as he wiped a layer of grime off a cracked monitor. It flickered to life with a soft whir, reminding him of a cat coughing up a hairball. A digital interface blinked at him, its pixels struggling valiantly in the Martian gloom. Talon chuckled darkly, which was pretty much the only way to chuckle these days. If there's a ghost in this machine, it's about to meet the friendliest exorcist it's ever seen. A few button presses later, the screen displayed a list of files, most tagged with names like Terraform Proposal #568 and Martian Agriculture Failures, Volume 12. But one caught his eye: cultural practices, dance and movement. He snorted, of course. Because nothing says survival like a good cha-cha. Still, curiosity got the best of him. He tapped the file open, revealing a treasure trove of information on human dance, complete with videos and descriptions. Talon leaned back, a grin spreading across his face. Well, isn't this just the ticket to nowhere? Dance lessons on the Red Planet. Let's see those Xylocs try to outgroove us now. The more he read, the more he realized dance was never just about movement. It was about defiance, about existence, about telling the universe to kindly sod off because humans were going to jig anyway. And it wasn't just the dance itself, it was the spirit behind it, a spirit that could be translated into their struggle against the Xylocs. Talon's grin widened. We may not have a lot, but damn if we don't have rhythm. Meanwhile, Lyra was busy turning the caverns of Mars into an impromptu dance studio. It wasn't much, certainly nothing you'd want to write home about if anyone had a home to write to. But it was theirs. All right, folks, she called to the small group of humans gathered around, their faces a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. We're going to learn something new today, and no, it's not the art of enduring the eternal Xylocs tedium. We're learning to dance. A murmur of disbelief swept through the crowd. People didn't gather much anymore unless it was for a mandatory productivity update or to witness someone being made an example of. So this was unusual, to say the least. One voice piped up, gruff and laced with cynicism. Dance. You mean that thing where we move about like idiots? Lyra gave him a smile sharp enough to cut glass. Exactly. Moving about like idiots is kind of what humans are great at. Might as well embrace it. This earned a few chuckles, a rare sound in the dim cavern. Encouraged, she continued, look, it's not just about flailing your limbs. It's about expression, about saying, I'm still here, you can't break me. A lanky man with a face carved out of hardship raised a hand, more out of habit than necessity. What's the point? We're stuck here under the Xylocs' boot. We dance, they zap us. End of story. Then we dance anyway, Lyra replied, her voice steady. Because if we're not fighting back any way we can, they've already won. The group shifted, considering. It was a new idea, and new ideas were a rare commodity. Besides, she added with a grin, if they zap us while we're dancing, maybe they'll slip on their own slime and fall on their asses. That got a proper laugh, the kind that made the cavern feel just a little bit warmer. Lyra raised her hands, clapping out a rhythm. All right, let's start simple. Follow my lead. Talon was right. The dance was more than just a distraction. As Lyra moved, her body a fluid rebellion, the others began to mirror her step by step. It was a different kind of unity, one the Xylocs had never anticipated. Here, in the echoing depths of Mars caverns, humanity was finding a new beat. The Xylocs weren't oblivious. Not entirely, anyway. For creatures that looked like a cross between a grasshopper and a bureaucratic nightmare, they had a surprising knack for sensing when things were not going according to plan. Maybe it was the humans laughing more, or the fact that they were moving with an energy that wasn't accounted for in the Xylox's efficiency maximization algorithms patent pending. Either way, the patrols increased, and so did the tension. The Xylox leaders, in their infinite wisdom, decided the best way to deal with the situation was to stare menacingly, their beady eyes trying to pierce through human resolve. But as it turns out, menace only goes so far when your audience is busy doing the electric slide. Talon watched from the sidelines, his heart doing its own complicated dance. He'd seen the power of ideas before, but watching it unfold here, watching Lyra lead with such fierce joy, was something else entirely. "You're really onto something here," he told her after one of their impromptu sessions, as the group dispersed to their respective hovels. Lyra shrugged, a wicked glint in her eyes. "They don't know what to do about us. It's like we've thrown a wrench in their perfect little machine. Yeah, and judging by the looks on their faces, it's a rusty, ugly wrench they just can't seem to polish up," Talon replied. It's beautiful. Lyra's gaze softened, though her words maintained their edge. "We can't stop. Not now. You know that, right? Stop." Talon feigned shock. "And miss out on all this cardio." Never, but beneath the banter, he understood the gravity of their situation. If they stopped, if they let the rhythm die, all would be lost. The next weeks were a blur of movement and whispered secrets. The dance spread like wildfire through the colony, each participant adding their own flair, their own defiance. It was a rebellion in slow motion, invisible to the Xylox because it didn't fit into their neat categories. Humans were supposed to be downtrodden, compliant. Instead, they were becoming something else. The Xylox reacted as only they could, by implementing more rules. The new regulations were as convoluted as they were ineffective, designed to crush the spirit that was giving humanity hope. But the more they tightened their grip, the more the dance slipped through their fingers. Talon found himself marveling at how something so simple could be so powerful. He joined in, his own feet finding the rhythm, his heart holding onto the hope that pulsed through the caverns. "Do you think they'll ever understand?" he asked Lyra one day as they rested after a particularly energetic session. "Who?" "The Xylox." Lyra shook her head. "They'd need souls to understand." "Good point," Talon conceded. "Guess we'll just have to keep confusing them," and confuse them they did. As the days turned into weeks, the colony transformed. People stood taller, spoke louder. Even the air seemed lighter, as if Mars itself was starting to root for the underdogs. Hope, it turned out, was more contagious than despair. But the real surprise came when the Xylox, in a rare attempt at understanding their human cattle, decided to witness one of these dance gatherings for themselves. It was probably intended as intimidation, a reminder that they were being watched. Instead, they got a front-row seat to humanity's defiance. Lyra led the dance, her movements a symphony of rebellion. The humans followed, each step a declaration, each turn a testament to their resilience. The Xylox watched, their frilled necks twitching in what might have been confusion or curiosity. Talon, standing next to Lyra, leaned over and whispered, "Think they realize they've accidentally encouraged a revolution?" "Doubt it," Lyra replied, her eyes on the aliens, unafraid. "They're too busy wondering if we've lost our minds." "Ah, but there's the beauty in madness," Talon said with a grin. "It keeps them guessing." The dance ended with cheers, the humans' laughter echoing through the caverns. The Xylox, having failed to dampen the spirits of their captives, departed, their expressions unreadable. "They didn't stop us," Lyra pointed out as she watched them leave. "Nope," Talon agreed. And that's the first step. He knew it wasn't over, far from it. The Xylox weren't just going to pack up and leave because a bunch of humans discovered the cha-cha, but the dance had changed something fundamental. It had given them hope, a weapon more powerful than any blade. As they stood there, the Martian dust settling around them, Talon couldn't help but feel a strange sense of optimism. They had a long way to go and the path was fraught with danger, but at least they weren't alone. They had each other and they had the dance. "So what's next?" Lyra asked, her eyes alight with possibilities. "Next," Talon pondered, scratching his chin. I was thinking maybe tap dancing, or if we're feeling ambitious, the Macarna. Lyra laughed, shaking her head. You're an idiot, maybe, he replied, a twinkle in his eye. But I'm an idiot with a plan, and that's more than we had yesterday. Together, they walked back into the cavern, the murmur of hope rising around them like a song. The Xylox had a knack for turning up the pressure. You had to hand it to them. If life was a pressure cooker, they were the Michelin star chef who insisted we were just about ready. Surveillance drones became as common as the red dust on Mars, swooping through the caverns like oversized mosquitoes with an attitude problem. Talon and Lyra watched them buzz past with a mix of irritation and grudging respect. It took a certain talent to be that obnoxious. Guess they've been reading Oppression for Dummies again, Talon quipped, keeping one eye on the nearest drone. It hovered, emitting a high-pitched whine that felt like a drill bit making its way into his eardrum. Lyra snorted. Yeah, Chapter 1, more eyes, less privacy. I hear they're saving Chapter 2, panic-inducing protocols for the holidays. Can't wait, Talon replied dryly. Nothing says festive like a good old panic protocol. Despite the sarcasm, things were getting tense. The dance sessions had to go underground, literally. They moved deeper into the labyrinthine tunnels, away from prying Xylox optics. It was a game of cat and mouse, except the cat was an alien bug with a penchant for control issues, and the mouse was trying to out-boogie its captors. Lyra led a small group to a hidden section of the caverns, the kind of place where you'd expect to find a disgraced fossil or two, not a budding resistance movement. At the back of the group, Talon lugged along his monitor, the cracked screen flickering like it knew something nobody else did. All right, folks, Lyra announced, clapping her hands to get everyone's attention. Welcome to our new studio. Please ignore the decor, it's still in the early stages of gritty realism. A few chuckles from the group, though the tension was palpable, like a taut wire ready to snap. They were nervous, and rightly so. It wasn't just the Xylox they had to worry about. It was the looming threat of hopelessness, always lurking, waiting to pounce. Talon set up the monitor, tuning it into the dim glow of the caverns. As the others began their practice, he tinkered with the device, his mind trying to piece together a puzzle that had been nagging at him ever since the dance sessions began. "What you up to?" Lyra asked, sidling over during a break. Her breath was still a bit ragged, but she wore the kind of smile that dares the universe to try and wipe it off. "Oh, you know," Talon replied, staring at the screen as if it might sprout lips and start telling secrets. "Just figuring out how to overthrow an alien regime with interpretive dance." "You're kidding," she said, though her eyes sparked with curiosity. "I mean, not completely," he admitted. "You know how the Xylox love their efficiency algorithms. Well, I think we might be able to throw a wrench in them. A big, clumsy, human-sized wrench." He tapped a few keys, the monitor flickering through digital files. "See, I've been decoding some old subspace frequency patterns." Apparently, the Xylox control systems are like a bad marriage. They only function with constant communication. Disturb that, and things get rocky. Lyra leaned closer, her interest piqued. "And how does our little dance rebellion fit in?" "Well," Talon grinned, "turns out, humans aren't just good at making noise. We can make a hell of a lot of it at the right frequencies. Dance isn't just movement, it's rhythm, vibrations. The Xylox systems might just be sensitive enough to feel the beat. You're saying we can dance them into disarray?" Lyra's voice was a mixture of disbelief and growing excitement. "More or less," Talon replied with a shrug. "It's not just the dance, though. We need to tap into the right frequencies. If we amplify our movements, sync them with the right vibrations, we could disrupt their control systems." Lyra looked back at the group, still practicing their steps, unaware of the potential power they held. "How do we start?" Talon leaned back, the flickering monitor casting eerie shadows on his face. "We need to understand two things: their system's weak points and how to hit them with our rhythm." "Simple, right? Simpler than surviving another Xylox efficient living seminar," Lyra remarked. "What do you need?" "First, more data," Talon replied. I need to get my hands on Xylox tech, something that can give us more insight into their communications. Second, we need to keep the dance sessions going, spread the rhythm. If we can't amplify it alone, maybe we can amplify it together. All right, Lyra nodded, determination setting her jaw. I'll talk to our people, see what we can scrounge up. Might take some creative bartering, but there's always the black market. Talon chuckled, Mars' very own flea market of doom. Sounds like a plan. As Lyra returned to the group, Talon kept working, diving into the monitor's data like it held the secrets to the universe. Perhaps it did, if you squinted at it just right and ignored the occasional blue screen of death. Days turned into a blur of movement and clandestine meetings. Under the oppressive eye of the Xylox, humans were learning a different kind of dance, one that involved staying one step ahead of their captors. The caverns became a hive of whispered plans and stolen glances, the kind of place where hope was rekindled in the unlikeliest of homes. Talon was becoming a regular in the Martian black market, a place that smelled distinctly of desperation and poorly made moonshine. It was here that he found what he needed, a Xylox communication module, traded for a heap of dubious rations and a promise to fix a water recycler that had seen better centuries. The module was a piece of alien technology that looked like someone had a severe misunderstanding of what a Rubik's Cube should be. Talon took it back to the archive room, the only place that offered a semblance of privacy for his experiments, and got to work. It was late when Lyra joined him, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She peered over his shoulder, her expression curious and a little concerned. "How's our secret weapon coming along?" Talon didn't look up, his fingers dancing over the device's alien surface. Turns out Xylox tech is kind of like trying to read an instruction manual written in hieroglyphics on acid. But I'm getting there, Lyra laughed, the sound a balm to the tension that had been building around them. "You always did have a way with words. Words are easy," he replied, finally glancing up. "Making this work, though, that's the real trick. You'll figure it out," she said confidently. "You always do." Her faith in him was both reassuring and terrifying. Failure wasn't an option, not when so many people depended on them. Together, they spent the night working, dissecting the Xylox module piece by piece. It was a slow, painstaking process, but with each discovery, each breakthrough, they grew more convinced that their plan could work. As dawn seeped through the cracks in the cavern walls, Talon finally leaned back, stretching his tired muscles. "You know," he said, stifling a yawn, "I think we might just pull this off." Lyra grinned, triumphant despite the exhaustion. "And here I thought you were just in it for the cardio. Don't get me wrong, the chance to outlast the Xylox in a dance-off is a bonus. But if we can turn this into something more, we win." Lyra finished, her eyes alight with the fire of rebellion. "We might actually win." They weren't there yet. The path was still fraught with uncertainty and danger, and the Xylox wouldn't take this lying down. But for the first time, there was a sliver of hope, a tantalizing glimpse of freedom that made every risk worth taking. As they packed up their findings, preparing to face another day under Xylox oppression, Talon couldn't help but marvel at the audacity of their plan. Dancing their way to freedom, it was insane, improbable, and just crazy enough to work. And if the Xylox had taught them anything, it was that humans were nothing if not wonderfully, magnificently unpredictable. The irony of it all was that their dancing, the thing that had become a symbol of resistance, might just get them all killed. The Xylox, in their infinite wisdom, probably saw it as some elaborate mating ritual and decided to stamp it out. Talon and Lyra had been laying low, guiding their ragtag dance crew through the underground caverns like a twisted version of "So You Think You Can Survive." Then, as if the universe wanted to remind them it had a wicked sense of humor, the drones started showing up in places they shouldn't. The caverns were supposed to be their sanctuary, but no place was safe when your oppressors had the surveillance capabilities of a paranoid god with too much time on its hands. The first sign of trouble was the sudden disappearance of half their group. One minute they were there, perfecting moves that could theoretically destabilize an alien regime, and the next, gone without a trace. Lyra and Talon exchanged glances that could have melted titanium. "We've been compromised," Talon muttered, his voice barely a whisper over the distant hum of a drone. "No kidding," Lyra retorted, her eyes scanning the shadows. "I was just about to chalk it up to everyone suddenly getting a life." Their makeshift studio was hastily abandoned, the group scattering into the labyrinthine tunnels like cockroaches under a flashlight. Lyra and Talon took the lead, slipping into narrower passages that seemed to close in around them with every step. "Any ideas?" Talon asked, his tone loaded with the kind of sarcasm that comes naturally when you've accepted that the universe hates you. "Yeah, how about not getting caught?" Lyra shot back, her breath hitching as they bolted down a corridor that seemed to spiral into nothingness. Behind them, the ominous buzz of drones grew louder. The Xylocs weren't just watching anymore, they were hunting, and Talon had the sinking feeling they weren't in the mood for catch and release. They rounded a corner, coming face to face with a dead end. Well, that's just perfect, Talon thought, because nothing says well-thought-out escape plan like running headfirst into a wall. Lyra glanced at him, her expression caught somewhere between determination and the kind of resignation usually reserved for people waiting in line at the DMV. "We need a diversion," she said. "Great. Got any fireworks hidden up your sleeve?" Talon replied, his mind racing. "Think, damn it." "No, but I've got something better, 2 left feet." She grinned, the kind of smile that suggested she might be about to do something incredibly stupid or incredibly brave. "Lyra, I know we've talked about using dance as a weapon, but this isn't exactly what I had in mind." She shrugged, already moving to the rhythm of some invisible beat. "If they want a show, let's give them one." Talon watched as she stepped into the open, her movements fluid and confident. Her body seemed to speak its own language, one that defied logic and gravity. The drones hesitated, their sensors likely trying to process what the hell was happening. Lyra danced like her life depended on it, which, all things considered, it did. Talon took the chance to slip away, moving through the shadows until he reached another passage. He'd have to circle back, find a way to lead them away from her. But for now, her distraction was working. The drones were fixated on her, like they couldn't quite decide if she was a threat or a curiosity. Perhaps both. He maneuvered through the tunnels, occasionally stopping to listen for the telltale hum of drones. It was a game of cat and mouse where the cat had GPS, night vision, and a really bad attitude. After what felt like hours, he found himself in a part of the caverns he barely recognized. It was quieter here, the oppressive silence almost comforting in its own way. He double-checked his surroundings, making sure he hadn't been followed before allowing himself to relax, if only slightly. Footsteps echoed softly and he tensed, ready to bolt if necessary. But it was Lyra who appeared, looking slightly worse for wear but otherwise triumphant. "Miss me?" she asked, a lopsided grin on her face. "More than I'd miss a root canal," he replied, relief flooding him. She punched his shoulder lightly, still grinning. "I think we lost them for now. Great." "Now what?" Talon asked, leaning against a wall. "We rally," Lyra said, her eyes fierce. "We need everyone back together and we need to step up our game. The Xylocs know we're up to something. It's time to show them how dangerous we can be. Dance harder, kick more ass." Talon suggested, raising an eyebrow, something like that. Her smile was sharp enough to cut steel. "We've got the moves. Now we need the numbers." They spent the next few days in a series of clandestine meetups, spreading the word among their allies. The news of the Xylocs crackdown had everyone on edge, but there was a flicker of hope too. People were starting to believe in the impossible, that they could fight back in ways that didn't involve just surviving. The archive room had become their unofficial headquarters, a neglected relic from humanity's earlier days on Mars. It was dusty and cramped, but it offered a sense of security, a place to regroup and plan. Talon and Lyra gathered their core group, a motley crew of misfits and rebels who were more than ready to take a stand. "We've got the tech," Talon said, gesturing to the Xylox module they'd managed to acquire. "And we've got the rhythm. Now we need to put it all together," Lyra nodded, her gaze sweeping over their ragtag assembly. "This isn't just about dance anymore. It's about sending a message. We're not just here to survive, we're here to live, and we'll do it on our terms." There were murmurs of agreement, a collective resolve settling over the group like a comforting blanket. Talon took a deep breath, feeling the weight of their mission. They were about to attempt the impossible, and there was no room for error. The plan was simple, at least on paper. They would use the gatherings to amplify their movements, sync them with the subspace frequencies Talon had been mapping out. If they could disrupt the Xylox communications even for a moment, it would be enough to cause chaos, just enough to make things difficult for their oppressors. And in chaos, there was opportunity. The Xylox might have been efficient, but they were also predictable. They relied too much on their tech, forgetting that humanity had something they never would: the ability to adapt, to improvise, to laugh in the face of certain doom. It was a gamble, but when had they ever had anything else? Lyra and Talon shared a look that spoke volumes. They were in this together, come what may. The day of the big gathering came, the air thick with anticipation and tension. The cavern was packed with people, all eager to be part of something bigger than themselves. Talon adjusted the monitor, making sure everything was set up. The flickering screen was their lifeline, a connection to the frequencies that could make or break their rebellion. Lyra stepped forward, addressing the group with the kind of charisma that came naturally to her. "We're going to make history today," she began, her voice clear and strong. "Not because we're heroes, but because we're tired of being victims." There were nods and murmurs of agreement. The crowd was ready, united in their defiance. Talon took his place beside Lyra, feeling the energy crackle through him. It was the kind of moment where anything felt possible, the calm before the storm. As the music started, the cavern came alive with movement. It was a dance unlike any other, a symphony of defiance and hope. Talon could feel the vibrations in his bones, the rhythm pulsing through the air like a living thing. The Xylox wouldn't know what hit them. Today, they were more than just survivors. They were revolutionaries, and they were ready to dance their way into the annals of history, one defiant step at a time. The vibrations grew stronger, the air thrumming with energy as the group moved in perfect harmony. Talon focused on the monitor, watching the frequencies shift. The Xylox communications were beginning to stutter, and he allowed himself a small, triumphant smile. Lyra caught his eye, her expression one of fierce determination. They might be dancing for their lives, but in that moment they were also dancing for their freedom. The drones would come, the Xylox would retaliate, but they would be ready. Today, they'd shown that even the smallest gestures could create ripples of change. And as the final notes echoed through the cavern, Talon knew they'd made their mark, a message to the Xylox that humanity wouldn't be silenced. The rebellion had just begun, and there was no turning back. The rebellion was barely getting off the ground when the Xylox decided to bring down the hammer. And when I say hammer, I mean a relentless campaign to squash any sign of resistance, like a boot stamping on a particularly resilient bug. Or a human, as the case may be. Our last dance had barely echoed through the caverns before the drones were back, swarming like locusts on steroids. It was like they'd taken our little show as a personal insult. Maybe they had. Maybe they just didn't appreciate interpretive dance. Either way, they weren't in the mood to negotiate. Lyra and I had split up, not by choice but by necessity, like two equally bad ideas that couldn't be in the same place at the same time. We'd always known there was a chance we'd get separated, but knowing it and living it are two very different things. Now, here I was, alone in a dingy tunnel, feeling less like a hero and more like a rat in a maze designed by a particularly sadistic cat. I'd lost track of Lyra somewhere between the 5th and 6th drone ambush. It was hard to keep count. Those things multiply like bad decisions. The last I saw of her was a flash of determination, and maybe a hint of that trademark recklessness she wore like a badge of honor. Or maybe it was just the light playing tricks on me. Either way, I hoped she was giving them hell, because I was sure as hell catching it. The Xylocs weren't just aiming to capture us. They were hunting us down with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. I had the dubious pleasure of running into a patrol, and by running into, I mean they captured me with all the ease of a fisherman landing a particularly dopey goldfish. Their productive enhancement zone, what we'd previously referred to as a labor camp, was a lovely place, if your idea of luxury is a cell that smells like despair and recycled air. The Xylocs had a way of stripping away humanity, one layer of dignity at a time, like the world's worst onion. The moment I was thrown into the cell, my mind started working overtime, not unlike a malfunctioning robot. Panic was an old friend at this point, but I still made room for a bit of hope, even if it was the kind that had a tendency to stab me in the back. Nice place, I muttered to myself, eyeing the cracked walls and the single, flickering light that seemed to take personal offense at working correctly. Wonder if they offer room service. No, but we do have a lovely view of nothing, came a voice from the shadows. I turned, barely managing to hide my surprise. The voice belonged to Sark, one of our tech wizards. Last I'd heard, he was working on some new gadget that would hopefully give the Xylocs a headache. Nice to know he'd ended up here too. Misery loves company, after all. Sark, you old scoundrel. Didn't think I'd see you here, I said, trying to sound more flippant than I felt. Likewise. Guess we both got caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, Sark replied, his voice dripping with sarcasm. More like the wrong planet at the wrong millennium, I said, forcing a grin. We exchanged a few more pleasantries, if you can call miseries shared over impending doom pleasantries, before the guards decided they wanted my special brand of expertise. Turns out the Xylocs had a keen interest in something I'd inadvertently become good at: hacking. More specifically, they wanted me to work on a device that would improve their surveillance systems. You know, help them be even more efficient in making our lives miserable. Sure, I'll get right on that, I'd told them, my voice oozing sincerity like a snake oil salesman. They didn't seem to appreciate my humor, which was their loss, really. What's the plan, Talon? Sark asked as the guards dragged me away. Work slow and screw up as much as possible, I replied, managing a wink. Buy us time, maybe even find a way to turn it against them. Good luck, Sark said, his expression grim but supportive. Yeah, well, luck's been scarce lately, I retorted. But then so has sanity, and I'm still managing to hold onto some of that. The lab they took me to was a nightmare of wires, blinking lights, and alien tech that looked like it had been designed by someone who didn't have a clue how humans worked. Or maybe they did, and that was the problem. The Xylocs overseeing my work was a charming fellow named V-Rex. I say charming in the way you describe a pit of vipers as cozy. He watched me with the kind of interest you'd usually reserve for a particularly complex puzzle or a really good sandwich. Work quickly, human, V-Rex said, his voice a slithering hiss that didn't quite match his cold, unblinking gaze. Oh sure, right after my coffee break. I shot back, settling into the chair with all the enthusiasm of a condemned man. Time passed in a blur of wires, circuits, and my best attempts at sabotage. It was a balancing act, staying just incompetent enough to avoid drawing suspicion, but not so much that they'd replace me. I had to hope that Lyra was out there, staying one step ahead of the Xylocs, rallying what was left of our ragtag band of rebels. The days dragged on, my hope dwindling like rations in the productivity enhancement zone. I was starting to wonder if we'd really made a difference, or if all we'd accomplished was to amuse the Xylocs with our futile flailing. The darkest hour truly is just before the dawn, or so the saying goes. But here, it felt like the dawn was a long way off, and the night was perfectly content to stay forever. Then came the news that several of our key figures had been captured. The Xylocs were tightening their grip, and for the first time I felt a pang of despair so deep it left a hollow ache in my chest. This was their endgame, their final move to crush us once and for all. V-Rex watched me with a smug satisfaction, as if he could read the defeat etched into my features. "You see, human, resistance is futile," he said, his voice oozing with condescension. "Well, if we're quoting sci-fi classics now, I'm afraid I'm contractually obliged to ignore you," I replied, trying to muster a defiant grin. But inside, I could feel something breaking. Maybe it was my spirit, maybe it was the last shreds of hope I'd clung to. Either way, it was like losing a part of myself I'd never get back. I kept working because what else was there to do? The Xylox had us cornered, and every move we made seemed to lead us further into their trap. Sark's words echoed in my mind, a reminder that we were in this together, even if it didn't feel that way. Maybe we'd failed. Maybe the Xylox would win, and we'd be nothing more than a footnote in their history of oppression. But as long as I was breathing, I'd keep fighting, even if that fight was just finding ways to screw up their plans one microchip at a time. And maybe, just maybe, Lyra was out there, ready to remind the universe that we weren't done yet, that we still had a few moves left in us, even if they were the desperate flailings of a creature backed into a corner. When Virex wasn't looking, I'd pause, stare at the mess of wires and circuits in front of me, and think about our last dance. I'd remember the way the air had thrummed with energy, the way we'd moved as one. It felt like a lifetime ago, but it was a good memory, a reminder of what we were capable of. Hope might be a distant memory, but defiance, that was something I could hold onto, even in my darkest hour. So I worked and I waited and I plotted because the dance wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. There's something about being locked in a cell that really makes you reevaluate your life choices. Like that time you decided investing in used spaceship parts was a genius move. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. But sitting in that cell, I had a lot of time to think about what brought me here. The rebellion, the dance, the Xylox with their charming habit of cultural genocide. You know, the usual existential crises. Anyway, between pondering my life's regrettable decisions and trying to figure out how to turn the Xylox's fancy tech into something more useful, like a toaster, I was also busy trying to get a message to Lyra. The idea was to use our dances to communicate, like some kind of interstellar Morse code. Only instead of dots and dashes, it was more like spins and twirls. We'd used it before, but that had been under significantly less crappy circumstances. The trick was embedding the message into the moves. Something subtle, something only Lyra would understand. In this place, subtlety was key. The Xylox weren't known for their nuanced appreciation of human culture, but they were annoyingly good at noticing when things didn't add up. Getting the message out was a bit like peeling an onion. Not the lovely layers part, more like the eyes burning and tears streaming down your face, while wondering why you even started this in the first place bit. Luckily, I had a tiny window of opportunity when Vrex's attention drifted, probably contemplating new ways to be a massive pain to humanity. I managed to slip a coded sequence into the surveillance footage, just a little something to remind Lyra of that time we danced under the Martian moons. It was our signature move, a bit of flourish that said, "Hey, remember that time we weren't neck-deep in alien oppression?" Good times. And then, like a good dance move, it was all about the timing. I needed her to receive the message and figure out what I was planning. This wasn't just a Hail Mary. It was the kind of desperate gamble you only make when you've got nothing left to lose and everything to gain. After what felt like an eternity in the productivity enhancement zone, where productivity was a joke and enhancement was being alive, the guards dragged me back to my cell. Sark was there, still holding onto that tech wizard vibe like a lifeline. "Managed to get something out?" he asked, trying to sound casual while failing spectacularly. "Yeah, let's hope Lyra's still got the moves," I replied, stretching out on the cold, hard floor. "Otherwise, this is going to be the world's most disappointing encore. Think she'll understand?" I shrugged. "Lyra's reckless, not stupid. If anyone can catch on to this, it's her." Sark chuckled darkly. "Well, here's hoping she's not too busy being heroic. Or dead," I added, Because optimism is for people who haven't had a Xylox boot on their throat for a decade. Meanwhile, Lyra was out there, somewhere in the Martian hellscape. She was probably dodging drones, making sarcastic comments about the Xylox's questionable design choices, and maybe, just maybe, picking up on the message I'd squeezed into the digital ether. Lyra's strength was all in her unpredictability. You never quite knew what she'd do next, which was exactly what made her so infuriatingly competent. She'd once leaped from a cliff to avoid a Xylox patrol, landing in a pile of discarded tech like some kind of reckless superhero with a penchant for sprained ankles. There was no doubt she'd get the message. It's what she'd do with it that left me lying awake at night. But I had to trust her. Trust that she'd still be out there fighting, scheming, plotting the kind of chaos that'd make the Xylox regret ever setting their three-eyeballed gaze on humanity. Time in a cell stretches longer than a bad day at a Martian tax audit. But eventually, the day came when I felt the hum of potential rebellion in the air. It was subtle, like the moment before a thunderstorm hits and the world holds its breath. The guards were on edge, more drones buzzing around like they'd gotten a lucky break on the insect lottery. Something was happening, and then I knew. Lyra was out there, rallying the troops, ready to pull off whatever wild plan she'd concocted from our coded dance. The silent communication was our ace in the hole, our one shot at disrupting the Xylox's systems at a critical moment. The plan was simple, really. In that way, skydiving without a parachute is simple. Synchronized dances across the caverns, using them as a conduit to disrupt Xylox tech. It was risky, bordering on suicidal, but then again, so was everything we did. As the moment approached, my heart pounded in my chest like a jackhammer on overdrive. If we pulled this off, it'd be the kind of victory bards sang about if Mars had bards and any of us survived to hear them. The dance was more than a dance now. It was a weapon, a tool, a middle finger to the Xylox and their constant oversight. If we could sync our moves, time them with their system cycles, we might just shut them down long enough to get a real shot at freedom. In the end, it was about more than just survival. It was about sending a message, standing up to the Xylox the only way we knew how, with style. As the guards shuffled past my cell, I caught a glimpse of something in their eyes. Fear. No, couldn't be. But there was definitely something there, a flicker of uncertainty. Maybe they knew, maybe they sensed that the rebellion wasn't dead yet, that we were just getting started. The plan unfurled like a battered old flag, with Lyra at the center, orchestrating the chaos. Reports of system failures, drones going haywire, guards confused as hell as the network crumbled around them, and all because of a dance. The beauty of it was in its sheer audacity. We'd taken something the Xylox saw as trivial, an annoyance, and turned it into a weapon. It was the kind of poetic justice that deserved a standing ovation. As the system hiccoughed and groaned, I felt a surge of hope I hadn't allowed myself in a long time. Maybe we'd fail, maybe we'd end up as another grim statistic, but for this moment we were winning. Talon, Sark whispered, excitement barely contained. It's working. She's actually doing it. Damn right she is, I muttered, a grin tugging at my lips. Told you she's reckless. The Xylox were scrambling now, trying to regain control, but Lyra was like a whirlwind, unstoppable and infuriatingly effective. It was a symphony of chaos, every beat a step closer to turning the tide. For the first time in a long time, it felt like we weren't just surviving. We were living, fighting for something bigger than ourselves, bigger than the Xylox and their endless oppression. As the system flickered and the lights dimmed, I knew we'd scored a victory, however small. We'd reminded the Xylox that humanity wouldn't go quietly into that good night. We'd rage and we'd dance and we'd fight with everything we had. And maybe, just maybe, we'd win. The dance was far from over, but this was a good start. A beginning, not an end. And for now, that was enough. Here's to Lyra, Sark said, raising an imaginary glass. To Lyra, I agreed, clinking my own imaginary glass against his. May she never stop dancing. As the cell door slammed shut, I lay back with a smile, listening to the sounds of chaos echoing through the caverns. The Xylocs had underestimated us, and that was their first mistake. Here's hoping they'd make many more. There's a peculiar kind of madness that descends on a person when you're about to try something incredibly stupid, like base jumping without a parachute. Or, in our case, using a dance routine to take down an alien oppressor's entire system. I could feel it vibrating in the air, like static shock just waiting to zap you if you aren't careful, or if you're really lucky. The Xylocs had this big shindig planned, some sort of self-congratulatory back-patting session where they'd marvel at how spectacularly they'd managed to turn Mars into their personal sweatshop. My guess, they'd be patting themselves on their weirdly shaped backs while sipping on whatever passed for champagne among their kind. Meanwhile, humans would be celebrating the event with a good old-fashioned dance revolution. From my cell I couldn't see much, but I could hear the faint crackle of announcements and an odd cheer here and there. It seemed the Xylocs figured today was as good a day as any to parade their superiority. Perfect. The bigger the event, the bigger the fall. I stretched out on the hard bench trying to focus. Lyra should be in position with her crew by now. The plan was as convoluted as it was brilliant, mostly because of the sheer audacity it required. The dancers, clad in stolen Xylocs uniforms, would infiltrate the event, weaving their intricate moves amongst the unsuspecting aliens, all set to a rhythm designed to mess with the Xylocs' tech frequencies. The idea was to trigger a system crash, a glorious symphony of malfunction that would make the Xylocs' tech go haywire. And they wouldn't even see it coming, not if Lyra could help it. The hell's that noise? Sark grumbled, his ear pressed against the cell door. Sounds like bagpipes being strangled. Reckon it's the Xylocs' national anthem, I replied, snickering. Their taste in music's as bad as their interior design. Great. Just what we needed, Sark said, rolling his eyes. A soundtrack for our impending doom. Not if Lyra pulls this off, I countered, my voice low and hopeful. She's got this. I had to believe that. Because if I didn't, well, the alternative was a future filled with more Xylocs enhancements, and I was betting they weren't about to hand out free vacations to the Martian beaches. Time dragged on, each second a tick closer to our big moment. And then, like a cue in a badly rehearsed play, the lights flickered and died. A chorus of confused Xylocs voices wafted down the hall, mingling with the human prisoners' cheers. Looks like the power's out, Sark noted, his tone laced with amusement. Guess you didn't pay the electric bill. Nah, that's Lyra's doing, I said, grinning wide. Our girls dancing up a storm. The chaos outside was palpable now, the sounds of confusion and panic as the Xylocs realized their precious tech was failing them. That's right, I thought. You're not the only ones who can throw a wrench into our plans. The door to our cell clicked open, a guard stumbling in with a face that screamed, "Why is this happening? Stay put." He shouted, though there was an edge of desperation in his voice. "We're working on fixing the problem, sure thing," I replied, raising my hands in mock surrender. Wouldn't dream of going anywhere. As soon as he left, Sark and I exchanged a look. It was time. On 3, Sark suggested. 3's good, I agreed, feeling the adrenaline course through me. 1, 2, 3, we burst through the cell door, joining the throng of prisoners flooding into the dimly lit corridor. The guards were overwhelmed, their attention divided between restoring order and figuring out why their tech was having a seizure. In the chaos, I caught sight of one of the surveillance drones, its usual menacing red eye now flickering an impotent green. It was like Christmas, if Christmas was celebrated with malfunctioning alien tech and a whole lot of human rebellion. "Look at that," Sark said, pointing at the sputtering drone. "Even the mosquitoes have lost their sting." "Yeah, well, let's not hang around to see if they find it again," I replied. We moved quickly, slipping through the confusion, heading for the heart of the chaos. The Xylocs had centralized their control systems in a sprawling command center, a room filled with screens and controls that now displayed nothing but static and error messages. The few Xylocs present were frantically trying to regain control, their bulbous eyes wide with panic. It would have been almost funny if it weren't so pathetic. Lyra was there, of course, right in the thick of it. Her movements were a blur of grace and precision, each step sending another sharp ripple through the Xylox systems. Her crew mirrored her, an improvised ballet that was as much about survival as it was about defiance. "Lyra," I shouted over the din. "Nice of you to join the party." She turned, her expression a mix of relief and concentration. "Talon, glad you could make it. Thought we'd surprise our hosts with an impromptu performance." "Never one to miss a good show," I replied, moving to her side. "Looks like you've outdone yourself this time. Just needed the right music," she said, smirking. Turns out chaos is my jam. With each spin and leap, the system groaned and faltered, the lights flickering in sync with the beats of their dance. It was a beautiful thing to behold, the culmination of years spent honing their craft, channeling it into something powerful enough to shake the Xylox to their core. The guards, overwhelmed and outnumbered, didn't know what hit them. The prisoners, emboldened by the confusion, seized the opportunity to fight back. It wasn't long before the tide had turned entirely, the Xylox retreating in disarray, their tight grip on the colony slipping through their fingers like sand. We pressed forward, pushing deeper into the command center. The air was thick with the smell of burning circuitry and desperation, two aromas that paired surprisingly well together. Lyra's eyes met mine, a spark of triumph in their depths. "We did it." "Damn right we did," I agreed, a grin spreading across my face. Reckon the Xylox didn't see that coming. Together, we moved through the room, seizing control one step at a time. The screens that had once displayed our every move now danced with the same glitchy energy that had brought the Xylox to their knees. The remaining Xylox guards were rounded up, their haughty expressions replaced with the cold realization of their failure. Funny how quickly things change when the tables are turned. As the dust settled, the gravity of what we'd accomplished hit me. We'd taken a stand, turned the Xylox's own tech against them, and snatched a victory where none thought possible. "Think they'll come back?" Sark asked, eyeing the defeated Xylox warily. "Probably," I replied, my voice steady. "But now they know we're not as spineless as they thought." Lyra stepped up beside me, her gaze sweeping over the room with satisfaction. "Reckon they'll think twice before messing with us again. Here's hoping," I said, raising an imaginary glass once more. "To defiance." "To defiance," Lyra echoed, her voice a fierce whisper. The dance wasn't over, not by a long shot. The Xylox would regroup and they'd come back with a vengeance. But for today, we'd won. We'd taken back a piece of our world, a piece of our pride, and it all started with a dance. As we stood in the wreckage of the command center, I couldn't help but chuckle. We'd beaten them at their own game, turned their weapons into tools of liberation. If that wasn't poetic justice, I didn't know what was. "Looks like we'll need a new name," Lyra mused, her tone thoughtful. "Oh?" I asked, curious. "Yeah. Can't call ourselves dancers anymore," she said, a wicked grin spreading across her face. "We're rebels now, rebels, huh?" I repeated, savoring the word. Has a nice ring to it. As we turned to face the future, however uncertain it might be, I knew one thing for sure. We'd won our freedom and we'd do whatever it took to keep it. One dance at a time. The dust settled and there we stood, Talon, Lyra, Sark, and a bunch of other ragtag misfits who'd somehow managed to pull off the impossible. We'd taken a stand against the Xylox and turned their own tech against them. Not bad for a day's work. Mars had never looked so free. That was, if you could ignore the rust-colored dirt, the oppressive heat, and the annoying fact that everything around smelled like burnt circuits and desperation. But hell, freedom always came with a side of grit, didn't it? "Looks like we've got the run of the place," Sark said, glancing around the command center with an air of cautious optimism. "Fancy a redecorating party," I snorted. "Let's start with getting rid of the Xylox funk. I'm thinking incense. Maybe some lava lamps, right, because ambience is what we're missing in an underground rebellion." Lyra chimed in, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "Hey, I'm just saying," I replied, holding my hands up defensively. If we're going to be rebels, we might as well do it with style. Lyra chuckled, a sound that was music to my ears after the chaos of battle. She knew as well as I did that style was about the only thing we could claim as our own these days. That, and the sweet satisfaction of knowing we'd given the Xylox the boot. The prisoners-turned-rebels buzzed with a heady mix of triumph and bewilderment. It wasn't every day you toppled your alien overlords with a dance routine. Hell, it wasn't any day until today. But we'd done it, and now it was time to figure out what our next steps were. So, what? We're just going to sit here and wait for the Xylox to come crawling back? Sark asked, crossing his arms as he leaned against a console. Because something tells me they're not the forgive and forget type. Probably not, Lyra admitted. But they're also not the type to let this slide without a serious regrouping. We've got a window to do what? Sark pressed. To spread the word, I said, the idea forming like a spark in the darkness. We've shown it can be done, that they can be beaten at their own game. Now we need to let the rest of Mars know it. Broadcast our greatest hits, you mean? Lyra said, catching on quickly. Exactly, I replied, nodding. We make sure every cavern, every tunnel, every damn hole on this rock knows what happened here today. Sounds like a plan, Sark said, a rare grin splitting his face. But how do we keep it from blowing up in our faces when the Xylox come back? Well, if they're going to come back, Lyra said, we make sure they're walking into a world that's ready for them. More dancers. Sark asked, clearly skeptical. Dancers, fighters, anyone who's tired of living under their thumb, I replied. We've got to make not being kicked around a trend. Right, Sark said, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. Create a movement, not just a moment, Lyra nodded firmly. Exactly. We need to turn this rebellion into something bigger. Something that'll make the Xylox think twice before messing with us again. I couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. We weren't just a band of misfits anymore. We were rebels and we had a cause worth fighting for. All right then, I said, feeling a newfound sense of purpose. Let's get this show on the road. The Xylox tech was still twitching and sparking like it had seen better days, but that didn't matter. We'd made it sing our tune once and we'd do it again. Lyra was already fiddling with the console, her fingers dancing over the keys with the kind of grace that had brought the Xylox to their knees. Think you can get it to broadcast? I asked, hovering over her shoulder. Give me a minute, she said, focused. This thing's more scrambled than an egg dropped from orbit, but I think I can make it work, Sark snorted. Great. Nothing like a scrambled message to inspire confidence. Hey, it worked for us so far, Lyra shot back, unperturbed. And besides, it's not like they were using it for anything better. The screen flickered, and after a few tense moments, a grainy image popped up. It was us, me, Lyra, Sark, and a gaggle of other humans, all standing in the aftermath of our victory. The sight of our ragtag group, victorious and defiant, made my heart swell. Looks like we're live, Lyra said, a note of satisfaction in her voice. All right then, I said, turning to face the camera. Let's give Mars something to talk about. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle on my shoulders. This was it, the chance to spread our message to every corner of the planet. People of Mars, I began, the words coming out stronger than I expected. Today, we've done the impossible. We've shown the Xylox that we're not as easy to push around as they thought. We've taken back a piece of our world, a piece of our pride. I paused, letting the words sink in. The room was silent, every eye on me. We've turned the Xylox's own tech against them, I continued, and we've shown that human creativity and unity are forces to be reckoned with. But this is just the beginning. We need to spread this message. Let every human on Mars know that we have the power to stand up for ourselves. Lyra stepped up beside me, her expression fierce and determined. We need to take this momentum and turn it into a movement. We need to show the Xylox that we're not afraid to fight back, that we're not going to roll over and let them take everything from us. Sark glanced at the camera, and for a moment, I thought he might actually say something inspiring. And if all else fails, he said, we'll just dance them to death again. The room erupted in laughter, the tension breaking like a wave against the shore. It was a moment of levity in the midst of chaos, A reminder that even in the darkest of times, we could still find a reason to laugh. "Spread the word," I said, my voice carrying over the noise. "Let's make sure every person on this planet knows that we're not going down without a fight. Let's show them what humans are made of," Lyra added, her voice ringing with conviction. The message went out, a beacon of hope in a world that had forgotten what hope felt like. And as we stood there watching the broadcast go live, I couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. We'd started something here, something that could change everything. "Think they'll get the message?" Sark asked, his tone skeptical yet hopeful. "If they don't," I replied, "we'll just have to send it again." Louder, with the broadcast sent, the command center was abuzz with energy. Plans were being made, ideas exchanged. The rebels were regrouping, ready to take the next steps in our newfound freedom. Lyra stood beside me, her gaze fixed on the screen. "We did it," she said softly, a hint of wonder in her voice. "Yeah, we did," I replied, feeling the weight of the moment settle over us. She turned to face me, her eyes bright with determination. "What's next?" I echoed, the question echoing in my mind. "We keep fighting, we keep pushing. We prove to the Xylocs that we're not just a bunch of dancers, they are dealing with rebels now. Rebels with a cause," Lyra said, a smile tugging at her lips. "Damn right," I agreed. "And as long as there's breath in our lungs, we'll keep fighting for what's ours." The path ahead was uncertain, filled with danger and challenges. But for the first time in a long while, it felt like our own. We'd taken a stand, and we'd keep fighting until the day we could call Mars our own again. "Think we'll ever get to enjoy those Martian beaches?" Lyra asked, her tone teasing. "Maybe someday," I said, chuckling. "But first we've got a planet to take back." As we stood together, looking out over the chaos we'd helped create, I knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning. The Xylocs might have turned Mars into a sweatshop, but we'd make sure it became something more. A place where humans could be humans again, not just cogs in an alien machine. And as for us, we'd be there every step of the way, dancing to the beat of our own rebellion.